Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Deputy Speaker, if you wanted to undermine Australia, what would you do? I'd suggest you'd start by making an attack on our nation's competitive advantages. The advantages that have made us one of the richest and most prosperous countries on the face of the planet. So if you want to undermine Australia, Deputy Speaker, the first place you'd start with coal. You'd attack that magnificent, rich, black coal seam that runs down our eastern seaboard. A coal seam that's been a source of our competitive advantage and wealth creation for decades. You would demonise it. You would teach children in schools that using coal-fired power to generate electricity would create bad weather. You'd show children pictures of coal-fired power stations with steam coming out of them, and you would tell them that it is carbon pollution. And Deputy Speaker, if you wanted to undermine Australia, you would put in a series of policies that undermined the viability of our coal-fired power stations and gave commercial advantage to their competitors by subsidising them. And you would add the cost of those subsidies onto the price of that electricity. That's what you would do to undermine Australia. And you would stand there with a straight face and you would say that coal is not economically viable as a source of electricity generation, when at the very same time, across more than 50 countries, hundreds of new coal-fired power stations are under construction that will pay a premium for Australian coal. You'd also, Deputy Speaker, if you wanted to undermine Australia, you would attack those that say that low-cost energy is important. You would attack them and you would vilify them. You would ridicule them as dinosaurs. You would call them deniers, equating them to deniers of the Holocaust, Deputy Speaker. And Deputy Speaker, you would also then go on and you would say, Deputy Speaker, that it is cheaper, Deputy Speaker, to generate our electricity from solar panels made from China. When, Deputy Speaker, knowing that you are not, when you are talking price, that you are not comparing like for like products, because you cannot compare intermittent electricity generation with the price of dispatchable or baseload generation. And Deputy Speaker, if you wanted to undermine Australia, once you had fixed our competitive advantage in energy generation, you would then go on and try and close down our coal exports. You would seek to block all new coal mines. You would, Deputy, you'd tie those mines up with red and green tape and tie them up for years and years in the courts so that those new coal mines wouldn't go on. At the very same time, you would bank and you would spend the billions of dollars in royalties that our existing coal mines own. If you wanted to undermine Australia, Deputy Speaker, after you had finished with coal, you would move on to uranium. You would know that as Australia, as a nation, as the world's largest known reserves of uranium, what you would do, you would ban nuclear power in this country. You would ban its development, even though that would make us only a standout nation of only one of the most 25 largest nations in the world. The 25 most largest and most powerful economies, you would make our nation a standout as the only nation that bans nuclear power or doesn't use nuclear power for baseload power. And Deputy Speaker, if you want to undermine Australia, you would demonise free markets and you would demonise entrepreneurship. You would seek to divide Australians. You would run a phony class warfare every day in question time, pitting one Australian against another Australian. If you wanted to undermine Australia and divide Australians, you'd also engage in identity politics, that everyone belongs to a special interest group and you would promote groupthink. And if you wanted to undermine Australia, Deputy Speaker, you would peddle the myth and the lie that workers are worse off than they were 40 years ago. You wouldn't let people know, Deputy Speaker, that in 40 years ago, life expectancy in this country was almost 10 years less. So someone born today, Deputy Speaker, as opposed to 40 years ago, has a different life expectancy of almost 10 years. You wouldn't let people know, Deputy Speaker, about how in that 40 years' time, someone living today in Australia has much greater opportunities to travel, both domestically and internationally. Someone in their 20s today, as compared to someone in their 20s 40 years ago, will have far greater opportunities to see so many more countries of the world. You won't let people know, Deputy Speaker, that over that 40 years, how there's been enormous improvements in communications. And in the iPhone that we take for granted today, the facilities that I have on that, Deputy Speaker, 40 years ago would have cost me upwards of $1 million. You'd also, Deputy Speaker, you wouldn't let people know about the enormous advances over the last 40 years that there's been in photography. I live in a bushfire-prone area, and one of the things that people tell me when a bushfire is approaching, what do they take with them? The first thing they grab is those family photos, because those photos are so valuable. And today, Deputy Speaker, as opposed to 40 years ago, someone will have hundreds, if not thousands, more photographs of themselves than they would have 40 years ago. They'll have them in colour, they'll be higher quality, Deputy Speaker, and they'll cost a fraction of what they did 40 years ago. They won't let you know, Deputy Speaker, that the cars that we drive today are not only, Deputy Speaker, cheaper but safer. Take an example of a new 1995 Toyota Camry. 1995 it was $24,000. Last year it was exactly the same price. But it was safer, it was more fuel efficient, and it was more luxurious. And yet, Deputy Speaker, it was the same price. If you equate that in wages to average wages, 20 years ago, that car cost 37 weeks for the average worker of his wage. Deputy Speaker, now it costs 16 weeks. And if you wanted, Deputy Speaker, to undermine Australia, you would idolise in our schools and universities the likes of Marx, Lenin and Mao. You would see that it was trendy to put their images on T-shirts, and you would never explain to our youth that their socialist ideology resulted in 100 million deaths last century, the greatest catastrophe in human history. And Deputy Speaker, if you wanted to undermine Australia, you would go about and you would ensure that Western civilisation is not taught in our schools. You would demonise our past, our proud Australian history. You would demonise it. You would make out that our forefathers were genocidal, misogynists, racists, Deputy Speaker. But sadly, Deputy Speaker, that is what we see. Those things that I went through, every single one of them, but what would you do if you want to undermine Australia, are the policies of the Labor Party and the Greens today in Australia. Deputy Speaker, we need to go back and we need to teach our children about our proud history and our past. We need to teach them about Western civilisation. We need to teach them, Deputy Speaker, about how it has been the free market that has lifted more people out of poverty than anything else that has been known in human history. We need to teach them, Deputy Speaker, that the wealth that we have in our nation today is not fixed. It did not come by through fluke or chance. It came through hard work, and it came about through competitive advantages that our nation has. And Deputy Speaker, the competitive advantages that we have as a nation, we must guard them with everything that we have. We have surrendered them with energy. We have a Labor Party over there that wants to impose a 45% emissions reduction target. Completely absurd. As we heard today from the Business Council's Deputy Speaker, they said that policy would be economically devastating. It would be a jobs killer. But that is what we are faced. We're also faced, Deputy Speaker, with a Labor Party that wants to leave this nation with an uncompetitive rate of corporate tax. Whether you think the corporate tax rate should be higher or lower, Deputy Speaker, we cannot go forward over the next decade with an uncompetitive corporate rate of tax. These are the things on this side of the House that we fight to. These are the things that I'm proud to stand here as part of the coalition party and fight for these things, Deputy Speaker.
Expired.